This is the Big O Show. This is the Big O Show.
I always wonder if that's a compliment, Ira, when it says that nobody talks the Heat and NBA like we do. Like, is that a good thing? Is that a compliment, or is that
no? I think some people actually do it correctly and fully informed and without really bad takes. But we do it our own unique way here on the Slomin's Home Security Inside the Paint. And you know what? The one thing I like about this format more than anything is we can get tangential on all this as Clay flies up and down there trying to get to the chat room.
Yeah, my headroom isn't exactly. That was weird. It looked a little different when I was in the tiny box in the crossover. I'll fix that at the break here. But you like us getting tangential.
I have a new computer this week, which I've been playing around with, so hopefully everything is fine. But the screen resolution is so poor that I literally went to my phone during the break to see if it actually looked that dark in here, which it didn't. But you know what? For the price they paid, I'm sure they got a quality computer item here, so I'll go forward with that.
So we see a good-looking Ira Winderman, even if you're not quite seeing the same Ira Winderman that we're seeing. So
well, then I want to go there. Then,
man, we got so much stuff to get to,
sure.
And as you mentioned in the crossover, our last show was before the trade deadline, and I think there were a lot of names that were floating out there. And I felt Ira, and we'll talk about this as the show goes on, but obviously the big trade, the one that sent Ben Simmons to Brooklyn and James Harden to Philadelphia, that shook up the Eastern Conference. It's obviously going to have an impact on the Heat. I would say even a direct impact when you're talking about as we get down this stretch of the season. And then also indirectly because of what it means for where they may end up in playoff position. But I felt like some of the smaller moves may end up having as big of an impact. I mentioned one of them before we went to break, and that was Serge Ibaka going to Milwaukee. I also thought the fact that San Antonio actually traded Thaddeus Young. You know, you and I talked about this a lot
on the buyout
leading
market,
up to the trade deadline, that, you know, it didn't make as much sense, even though the names were flying around, guys like P.J. Washington. Like, it didn't make as much sense to trade your first-round pick when you could swing for the fences in the offseason using that as a chip. But somebody like Thaddeus Young made a lot of sense, and now he's not going to be available. So where do you see this shaking out with the roster? You mentioned the decision with Caleb Martin, which really seems kind of like a no-brainer. It's more of a when rather than an if. But where do you see this all shaking out as these next couple of roster spots are going to be filled, and also where the Heat may turn now that somebody like a Thaddeus Young is off the buyout market?
Well, first of all, I just posted a story at the Sun Sentinel, possible options. There are not a lot. If Paul Millsap gets bought out by Philly, he hardly was great this year in Brooklyn, so I'm not sure. So to fill people in, because the rule is a little convoluted and people get these dates wrong. March 1 is the deadline. The NBA calls it it's a playoff waiver eligibility deadline. It means you must be waived if you were in the NBA this season on anything more than a 10-day contract. You must be waived by March 1st to be playoff eligible on another team. So what we're seeing right now is the push-pull, Clay. Right now, players want to get away from non-playoff teams who players are on the last year of their contracts to get to playoff spots. Teams know that. So, for example, the Goran Dragic buyout. San Antonio knows Goran wants to get to a playoff contender, and there's a lot of spots open for him there. But Goran might not want to give up any money. Give me my money and I'm gone. And the Spurs are sort of, well, give us a little back. Give us a little offset for what you got. As we get closer to March 1, desperation kicks in. Because if that player is not waived by March 1st, he's not playoff eligible. It's like Major League Baseball when you acquire a player too late and he's not eligible for the postseason. So we'll see more of this as we get closer to March 1 when it comes to who's going to be in the buyout market and who's not. Because of that, teams are not going to rush willy-nilly to pick up a player now. They want to see how the buyout market shakes out. And once a player is waived by March 1, he can sign anytime until the final day of the regular season to be playoff eligible. So there's time in this process. Most of these teams are not, we have to have someone now. We're desperate. Mm-hmm. These are ancillary playoff pieces. Goran is very interesting because when you look at the Milwaukee Bucks situation, Pat Connaughton has a finger injury right now. He's going to miss at least a month. In order to get Serge Ibaka, they had to give up Dante DiVincenzo, who was a big part of their playoff run to the playoffs last year before he was injured in that first-round series against the Heat. Man, Goran Dragic, if he went to Milwaukee right now, I think, would be a full-time rotation player, at least till Pat Connaughton comes back. And then his playoff savvy helps also. So I'm making the Bucks the front runner for him. So when you go back to the Heat, and I'm sort of cycling through here, I'm not so sure. You know, we talk about this. We almost devote a segment on this one name every week, that you're just not waiting on the Victor Oladipo thing. And to a lesser extent, are Markieff Morris coming back? And Clay, it's getting really interesting. We're getting sort of a critical mass on both. Because you and I, when we started this in September and October and November, we kept pushing the bar with Victor Oladipo. It doesn't matter if he's here, Ira, in November. There's plenty of time. We're just in December. Let's wait till midseason. Midseason came mid-January. No Victor Oladipo. Clay Ferraro goes, Ira, let's wait till the trade deadline. They'll be fine by then. Trade deadline comes. No Victor Oladipo. He's listed again as out tonight at FTX Arena against the Mavericks. So there is no finish line here. The finish line keeps getting pushed further back. It raises some questions. Markieff Morris, on the other hand, gets injured November 8th, not of his own doing, of Nikola Jokic's doing, or I think as he called, Markieff Morris called him in his tweet something like a fat boy or something like that, shoved him in the back, created that whiplash. And here's what's interesting. Markieff says he's been cleared. That's what Markieff says. But the Heat say nothing. Markieff is not doing contact work that we're seeing with the Heat, but he's going down to Stan Remy's gym and working out with Goran Dragic and Isaiah Thomas in full contact workouts where there aren't trainers, as opposed to the Heat facility where there are. That's convoluted. So as much as the buyout and what's going to happen next, we know Caleb Martin will get converted to a standard contract. Those two names hang in the balance. And every time the Heat looks at the buyout market, Clay, they say to themselves, is this player better than what I might have in Victor Oladipo? Is this player better than what I might have in Markieff Morris? And yet here we are on February 15th, and we're still not really sure what the Heat have in either of them. That's the lingering question. They know more than us because they see them in practice, or they see them not in practice. They don't even tell us. That to me is the big question mark. There's not a name, Clay, out there, and I'm sorry, I'll be long-winded here. I'll finish up. There's not a name out there in the perimeter on the buyout market who's better than Victor Oladipo. There's not a player out there on the power market who's a better player than Markieff Morris. But for now, Victor Oladipo and Markieff Morris are just names for us.
So make sure to drop your questions, your comments, and as always, please hit that like button. We really appreciate it. But you guys really drive this show. So any questions you might have about where the Heat may be going, Ira's a guy to go to for that, and I'll just play traffic cop. So I want to go back to the Markieff Morris situation. And so, you know, what you're saying is you're reporting facts. So I'm going to try to fill in kind of some opinion with this stuff. And what I'm seeing on this is you mentioned the fact there are trainers, Heat trainers at one place. They're not at the other. So what it feels like to me, Ira, is this feels a little bit like when you go back to the Chris Bosh situation where the Heat don't want to be the ones to put Markieff Morris in harm's way. That's how let's not aggregate this. This is my opinion as you kind of add all these things up. It feels like there's a real concern. And I think there's been some good reporting done on what the residual fallout could be from having whiplash a third time. I think it was the second time that he's had the injury. And so it really feels like the Heat don't want to be the ones pushing this. And they also, I mean, for liability's sake, you can understand why they wouldn't want their personnel working with him and something else happens. So I think that may be where we're at with that. I say maybe because you're trying to like add opinion and fill it in.
Sure.
On the Victor Oladipo front, I've always I know everybody's different on this. I've always targeted post All-Star break. And a big reason for that is it felt like last year he was never fully healthy. And so it was like, okay, he wanted to get on the floor. And we all know how badly he's wanted to be in Miami. We all know how much he wanted to impress Pat Riley and make sure to find. So I felt like his mind was pushing him to do things that his body wasn't quite ready to do. And oh, by the way, I think you may have been the one to ask him the question last year about whether or not he was fully healthy. And he kind of said, no, I'm still not myself. I'm not. Yeah. And he kind of said it was an honest answer.
Very
and
candid.
Yet I think it kind of gave some insight into, and this is why players all the time, like we want them to be honest, but when they're honest, everybody jumps on him, and people
Right.
viewed it as an excuse. It wasn't. He was never fully healthy. I think, and so Ira, I'm coming back to this. I feel like they're waiting for him to get to the 100% that he can be at this point in his career. Not the, hey, I'm 90% of I'm 100 I'm 90% of who I am now, even though I'm 50% of what I used to be. Victor Oladipo is not going to be 2019 Victor Oladipo. But what you need to do is make sure that he's not going to go out there and re-injure himself. And if he just goes out there and he plays and he stays healthy, if he plays to the level that he did in that Lakers game before he got hurt, that Victor Oladipo is better than anybody else they could have added at the trade deadline, save for like a James Harden or somebody else who'd have taken an enormous amount of assets to get.
I totally agree. And Clay, we need to now put that against who they might get. So I'm actually reading the story now that I just posted at thesunsentinel.com. So especially for our listeners out there and those in the chat room, these are either players who have been bought out or are linked to buyouts. And we'll let the listeners give their thoughts. And Clay, when I get done with this list, certainly would welcome your thoughts. So far, the names who've been speculated as either are already on the market or are headed to market by March 1st are these: DJ Augustine, Kent Bazemore, DeAndre Bembry, Eric Bledsoe, Goran Dragic, Drew Eubanks, Derek Favors, Enes Kanter Freedom, Gary Harris, Jeremy Lamb, Robin Lopez, Paul Millsap, Mike Muscala, Semi Ojeleye, Tomas Satoransky, Dennis Schroeder, and Tristan Thompson. So those are the names that are getting most of the traction. And I think you'd agree it's kind of meh. Like, you could put together a nice G-League roster. You could put together a lottery team if you want. So the buyout market always is more of a factor of who's there than necessarily what do you need. And maybe instead the Heat are saying, you know what? Got enough. We'll add developmental guys. Because at the end of 2 of the last 3 seasons, they added Kendrick Nunn and Omer Yurtseven as late season additions to develop them.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's where this is headed.
So you mentioned Goran Dragic, and by the way, I want to get to David Triana's question in a minute that he posted in the chat. Let's kind of look at where things stand with this. Goran Dragic loves Miami. He loves the Miami Heat organization. Like, this isn't reporting something that people can't see, but like, he is hanging around the team. You see him at games. Yes. I mean, I think he would want nothing more than to be back with this team. I think there are a couple of issues here. Now, and by the way, it can happen now. Now that he's been traded a second time.
And when you're done, I'm going to add in this. There is one thing more he wants, but continue, Clay.
Okay, but I'm going to caution yourself with this.
Okay.
The role that he would be taking on the Miami Heat with this present roster is not, I think, what he would necessarily want, and it's also not what I think Heat fans may envision him in the past. I mean, honestly, Ira, like you mentioned this in a crossover. If Tyler Hero's knee injury continues to flare up, and if that becomes an issue that's a lingering problem, like I could see Goran Dragic filling in more to the Tyler Hero come off the bench and score role than I could see him as coming in as a point guard at this point. And Gabe Vincent's put in a lot of time to where you're kind of liking. So there are just a number of reasons why this isn't the no-brainer that I think some fans would think that it is. But make no mistake about it. If everything would add up, he could be here. But when you look at somewhere like Milwaukee, where he could go and potentially get a ring, he could fill a role that like they really need somebody to jump into that spot. They need him. The Heat would want him. He would want Miami. They need him, and they would push harder for him. And I think his role there, even though Drew Holiday is obviously starting, his role there would be a bit more defined.
Yeah, I think you might, in moments of truth, when violence is not required, trust Goran Dragic over Grayson Allen. So you have that going on in Milwaukee. There's talk about Golden State, that they've never really had that true point guard beyond staff. Now it's different there. They have Draymond Green. But Draymond Green is a facilitating big man, sort of as like Bam and Jimmy Butler, which Goran Dragic thrived alongside on the way to the NBA Finals in 2020 here. Golden State to name. The Lakers have been floated. But man, you've got to be pretty desperate to go into that crap show. Yes, Goran Dragic late in games would be a preferable choice to Russell Westbrook because Goran Dragic can, what's the basketball term? Oh yeah, shoot. So he can do that instead. Chicago, behind Lonzo Ball, there's somewhat of a void. He can get minutes there. So, Clater, go back to what I was interrupting you on, and what you mentioned is this. We know the Heat have comfort in their starting lineup that's been very productive. Say what you want about Duncan Robinson, up and down. I'll let Big O argue with me on our accurate Pembroke Pines reports when we get back to that. But you know that it's worked really well with Bam and PJ Tucker and Jimmy Butler and Duncan Robinson and Kyle Lowry. So your question becomes this. Off the bench, Goran, if he were to come back, would not play ahead of Tyler Hero. I think you and I would agree.
Yep.
Then the Victor Oladipo thing. Would he play ahead of Victor Oladipo if he comes back? Well, Victor Oladipo is the great unknown. One thing we know about Goran is he's ambulatory. You know, they always say one of the best abilities is availability. Goran can give you that. Would he necessarily play ahead of Gabe Vincent when two-way guards are needed and you need defense also? For as much as it went to crap at the end of the Brooklyn game on Saturday, Gabe Vincent was the defensive choice on the court at the time because he's a two-way player. So you'd have to weigh that if you're the Heat also. I don't think Goran would want to come back, even though it'd be simple for him to just stay in Miami in a non-playing role. I think Goran wants to show Toronto, you made a mistake by not playing me, by not trusting me. He wants to show the league that San Antonio, you traded for a player who can play instead of written off. The other factor is, and this will be fascinating tonight, as a matter of fact, I need some help from our listeners out there, so people kind of lean in and listen in here. There's the Dallas Mavericks situation of going to Dallas and playing with his buddy, Luka Doncic. They won Euro Cup together for Slovenia. Now, Dallas added a point guard type of player.
And by the way, Ira, not to interrupt you, but Sham Sharani had just reported that the Spurs and Goran Dragic have reached a buyout.
As you would fully expect. That's
Yep.
where that was headed. So does Goran go to Dallas, but they just added Spencer Dinwiddie, and Jalen Brunson's been really good this season. So here's your assignment, Heat listeners out there on the Slomin's Home Security Inside the Paint show. If you spot Goran Dragic at tonight's Heat Mavericks game, and I believe he will be there, we need photo evidence either on your Instagram page or Twitter or somewhere else, and preferably, and again, because you're all my close personal friends, if you can tell us exactly what section and seat Goran is in so I can go talk to him, that would be preferable also. It's going to be really interesting. Does Goran lay low now that he has the buyout? Because now it's real. It's not just playtime. Or does Goran make himself very visible and tell buyout teams, hey, I'm here. I'm at an NBA game. The Heat are here. The Mavericks are here. Make me your best offer.
So this is what Goran Dragic's potential role would be on the Miami Heat. If Tyler Hero is hurt, he comes in and he plays. Yes. Because I think getting back to your original point about Gabe Vincent and being a two-way player, which Goran Dragic, God bless him, he is not. He tries, but he's not.
But he knows the system. But at least he knows the defensive system to try to fit into it.
But when you're looking at your bench lineup, and you've already got Tyler Hero, who's somebody coming, a microwave type scorer, but the defense is lacking a little bit. I don't think that you can play that combo coming off the bench in big, important games, important minutes. So then you start to look at, okay, who fits better on that bench unit? And
Good
so
point.
when you're playing, if you're assuming Tyler Hero is first off that bench, and he's going to be in that bench unit, Tyler and Goran, not so much of a fit. Tyler and Gabe Vincent, yeah, you can play that. Tyler Hero and Victor Oladipo, absolutely. Like, that's a perfect, those two guys, that's the type of thing you're looking for, because Victor Oladipo is going to be your defensive guy off the bench. And frankly, if he's healthy, and that's a big if, obviously, at this point, I think he's one of the guys playing down the stretch of games in the playoffs when you're going offense, defense, possession, you want him on the floor. So that's why when you're looking at Goran Dragic, and he's going to be looking at Milwaukee, like, man, I wouldn't just be going there to come off the bench and spell Drew Holiday during the regular season. He could have an actual role on a playoff and potentially a championship team. So those are the types of things. And look, we all love Goran, man. I mean, I don't know if there's a better guy to be around, but he's a guy that has pride, and you understand that. And he's a guy that if he wins a ring, he wants to be a part of that team and a part of actually getting to the winner's circle, not just somebody who's going to be riding people's
And Clay, how ironic would it be if the Heat play the Bucks in the first round? PJ Tucker, who was with the Bucks last year with the Heat, Goran Dragic, who was with the Heat last year with the Bucks, and sort of a reverse kind of deal there. That would be interesting also. Goran is the name on the buyout market right now.
All right, so much more to get to. You guys have had some great comments, great questions. We're going to get to those after the break. And also, I want to look at the Jimmy Butler. You mentioned the shoulder injury. I do wonder, you mentioned, is this just because he doesn't want to go to Cleveland, or is there something there? Because I noticed a couple of things, especially late in that game the other night against Brooklyn, that kind of made me shake my head a little bit. I want to get your take on that. That a lot more coming up right here on Inside the Paint.
This is the Big O Show. This is the Big O Show.